Alright, welcome back to Classics Abridged, where we're going through the Iliad by Homer using the Caroline Alexander translation. Last time, the Achaeans, aka the Danaans, aka the Argives, aka the Greeks, had just managed to get their greatest warrior Achilles to go cry in his tent, and turned half the Olympian gods against them. The story's off to a good start, is what I'm saying. Chapter 2 is really short, unless you're incredibly committed to learning the names, leaders, and relative military power of every single town in Homeric Greece, which I certainly am not. This so-called catalogue of ships goes on for about 300 lines. Then, just when you think it's over, Homer hits you with 60 lines outlining who the Trojans have brought to the fight. It's really exhausting because you're just not going to care about 99% of these people. Historically, however, this list is important. It represents a very early notion of a unified Greek identity. As we'll get to later in this chapter, the forces working for Agamemnon don't consider themselves to be countrymen. Each of the forces sent to Troy is from a separate tribe, which claims descent from an even more ancient mythic hero. Nonetheless, Homer consistently treats them as a single group. This is Pan-Hellenism in an unprecedented way for the time. Oh, and Hellenic means Greek, so you can add Hellenes to the list of names for the Greeks, not related to the character of Helen at all. Not being a classic scholar, I can't say if Homer is trying to encourage unification or is simply reflecting a growing notion of common identity, or maybe he just thought a big crossover would be super badass, but we've gotten off track. The second chapter picks up minutes after the end of the first. Zeus can't sleep because he's so busy thinking about how to make life suck for the Achaeans. The best plan he could think of is to send the god Dream to Agamemnon with a vision that will trick him into doing something stupid. You might be wondering why Zeus cares so much about this, but we actually don't find out until the next chapter. The vision he sends is this. Dream tells Agamemnon that Hera has convinced all of the gods to side with the Achaeans against Troy, and so that now they will succeed in conquering the city. In case you forgot, the speech is repeated in its entirety 3 times in quick succession. First when Zeus tells Dream what to say, then when Dream says it to Agamemnon, then when Agamemnon wakes up his generals and tells it to them. Have I mentioned that this is an oral tradition and we're all incredibly lucky to have writing so authors don't feel the need for this particular repetitive cliché anymore? Nestor, the eldest of the Achaeans, points out that if anyone else had a dream like that, they would immediately dismiss it as just a dream, but agrees that they should take it seriously since Agamemnon is, and I'm quoting, the one who claims to be by far the best of the Achaeans, which is an oddly specific statement, given that just last chapter we were shown just how unimpressive Agamemnon's leadership skills really were. Anyway, the story immediately takes a very confusing turn. See, Agamemnon, wide ruling king that he is, decides he's going to test the resolve of his soldiers. So he has all of the soldiers gathered in one place to make an announcement. Our poet Homer describes the army following the heralds thusly. And the army host surged after them, as when there goes a swarm of densely buzzing bees, streaming anew from a hollowed rock in clusters like grapes, zipping towards spring flowers in a throng on the wing hither and thither. Which, depending on your mood, could be seen as a very detailed, compound simile or just a painfully awkward one. Coincidentally, it also has the essential elements of a haiku, a juxtaposition of scenes, and the use of precise seasonal imagery, although it doesn't have the meter or conciseness that haikus are expected to have. So, once all of the soldiers have been summoned, what does Agamemnon have to tell them? He tells them that the whole war was a trick by Zeus to humiliate them. Then he goes into how shamed they will all be to go back as failures, and how easy it really should be for them to win. And to highlight this, he explains that if they declared a truce, and then all of the Greeks divided into groups of 10, and then all of the Trojans came out to pour wine, many of the groups wouldn't have a person to pour wine, which I have to say is the most torturous possible way of saying that the Greeks outnumber the Trojans 10-1. As far as I know, Homer didn't get paid by the syllable, so this is probably just meant to be an explanation that works for people with no mathematical education. Then Agamemnon makes a big mistake. Again. he starts listing actual good reasons to leave. In particular, he points out that if they don't leave soon, they'll have to rebuild the ships, and they haven't seen their families in years. Oh, and also, he's telling them that Zeus has turned against them. Can't forget that. Naturally, at this point, everyone decides to leave. The common soldiers even go into something of a frenzy at the prospect of getting to return home, and they rush for the ships. Yeah, there's no beautiful Renaissance painting of everyone fleeing. Sorry about that. Basically, nothing ever works out for Agamemnon. It's so bad that Hera has to intervene to prevent the end of the war. Remember, she wants the Greeks to destroy Troy because Paris insulted her. Hera has Athena inspire Odysseus to come up with a plan to get the soldiers to stay. Odysseus grabs Agamemnon's scepter in order to make himself look more official. You may recall that in the first episode, I mentioned that Homer has a lineage for everyone and everything in this story, and here is the lineage of Agamemnon's silver-studded pimp cane. This Hephaestus had toiled to make. Hephaestus gave it to Zeus, the lord, the son of Kronos. Then Zeus gave it to Hermes, the messenger and slayer of Argos, and Lord Hermes gave it to Pelops, driver of horses. Then Pelops, in turn, gave it to Atreus, shepherd of the people, and Atreus, on dying, left it to Thyestes, rich with many sheep, and Thyestes, in turn, left it to Agamemnon to carry about, and to be the lord of many islands and all of Argos. Now, if you were paying attention, you might notice that Argos gets killed during that story, and then is implied to be an entire island chain. And that is because Argos is an infuriatingly common name. The Argos that Hermes kills is a monster. The Argos that Agamemnon rules is an area. There's also the unrelated city of Argos, where the character of Diomedes comes from. And Odysseus's pet dog is named Argos. Even outside the Iliad, it keeps showing up. The guy who made the ship for Jason and the Argonauts was named Argos, and he named his ship the Argo. It's worse than Vegeta, son of Vegeta, ruler of Vegeta. But we've gotten off topic again. Odysseus, clever Odysseus, a man of many stratagems, now has this scepter of authority, which he puts to good use by hitting people with it and yelling at them. When he finds the generals, he argues that Agamemnon is lying about the gods being against them, which is not actually a confidence builder in my book. Confusingly, when he meets the common soldiers, he tells them that they should be listening to Agamemnon rather than to each other, even though it was Agamemnon that told them it was time to leave. Then he finds Thersites, the hunchback, who's widely known for being kings, which means most of our main characters. They're all kings or chieftains. Thersites makes a speech about how Agamemnon has gotten the best of the spoils of the other cities they've sacked, and even has gone out of his way to dishonor Achilles. He suggests just leaving Agamemnon on the shores of Troy with his treasure, rather than fighting and dying, just so that Agamemnon can get more treasure for himself. And that actually strikes me as pretty convincing. In fact, it strikes almost all modern readers as convincing. So, what is Odysseus' counterpoint? Well, he tells Thersites to know his place, and then beats him. So, what are we supposed to make of this scene? Without a doubt, the story as presented wants us to side with Odysseus. The common soldiers all cheer when they see the hunchbacked rabble-rouser being put in his place, and even comment that beating a cripple is the most awesome thing they've ever seen Odysseus do. Still, it seems like Thersites is saying what everyone else believes, and his argument is simply left unchallenged. Once all the common soldiers have calmed down, Odysseus and Nestor each stand up to make speeches. The one from Odysseus isn't very interesting, but Nestor's speech highlights a few important things. His speech is the first mention of why the Trojan War is even happening. That never came up in the first chapter. Taken in isolation, that is actually a bizarre detail, but it's evidence that the audience was expected to be familiar with the background of the story. And that tells us that the story of the Trojan War must have been around before Homer's Iliad was created, and probably for quite a long time. The reason for the war, if you're not aware, has to do with a woman named Helen. What exactly? Well, we don't find out till the next chapter when she shows up. Nestor also shows off what an incredibly unpleasant time and place this was. he says that the Achaeans should stay until every last one of them has raped the wife of a Trojan man. Our heroes, ladies and gentlemen. While it probably wasn't intentional, this detail reinforces one of the unexpected aspects of the Iliad, the Greeks being the villains. Consider that Zeus is against them, Agamemnon is incompetent, Achilles is a petulant child, and really, by the end of the Iliad, one of the only ambiguously heroic characters we see is Hector, who is the Trojan champion. Finally, in Nestor's speech, he advises Agamemnon on how to arrange the Achaean forces. He says to put clan by clan and tribe by tribe. By doing this, Nestor says Agamemnon will learn which tribes are worthy soldiers. This is partly a ploy by our poet Homer to make it so listeners can cheer for the heroes of their tribe. Yes, it also means that the men will be fighting to defend their kinsmen, but Nestor's comment makes it awfully clear what Homer was thinking. Achilles agrees to this and tells everybody to prepare to march against Troy. Spoilers, it's the second chapter, and it's not going to end well. We also learn a bit here that goes into the way the Greeks viewed their gods. Homer tells us that each man offered sacrifice to one or another of the ever-living gods. Presumably, if soldiers only sacrificed to Ares and Athena, the gods principally associated with war, Homer would have just said that. Instead, it seems that they seek the patronage of whatever gods make sense to them. Presumably, one might pray to Hera, reminding her of his wife and family who he needs to protect. And then there are the dozens of minor gods and living concepts that one might appeal to. Then, with the army assembled and sacrifices made, we get this description of the Achaean war host. As when obliterating fire rages through an immense forest on the mountain height, and from afar the flare shows forth, so the gleam of the sublime bronze of marching men glinting through the clear sky reached heaven. Wonderful imagery from Homer and translation by Caroline Alexander. As they march, we get the catalog of ships that I mentioned at the start of the episode. The most relevant detail is that when Achilles is out of the picture, it is Ajax who is the best of the Achaean warriors. Continuing this episode's sub-theme of infuriatingly common and redundant names, Ajax, son of Telamon, fights alongside his brother Ajax, son of Telamon. Different mothers. Anyway, the Trojans are warned by Iris, god of rainbows. We meet Priam here, who is the ruler of Troy, and his son Hector of the Shimmering Helm, the city's champion. The Trojan portion of the catalog is provided, and the chapter ends. Literally, it just stops. Stops with the line, Sarpedon and blameless Glaucon led the Lycians from faraway Lycia and the whirling eddies of Xanthos. Full stop. End of page. Those are relatively minor characters. And if you don't think they're minor characters, congratulations on your PhD in Lycian mythology. Armies will clash, and gods will go to war next time on the Iliad.